Hello and welcome to another episode of Locked On Wolves. Without Karl-Anthony Towns, Anthony Edwards played the hero on both ends of the floor, including an incredible game-saving block. We'll talk about what was most impressive about the win over the Pacers. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Friday, everybody. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Like I said, happy Friday, happy weekend, and happy Wolves game day. It's a victory Friday. Lots to get to today. The Karl-Anthony Towns injury was reported after I recorded Thursday's show. So I actually happened to do the first segment of Thursday's show was all about how the Wolves might play the Pacers without Karl-Anthony Towns. But at the time, I didn't know it was going to be a long-term injury. This is the post-game pod. I want to talk Wolves-Pacers, especially with how that game closed. But I want to do a little bit on the Wolves Sans Towns here today as well. And then we'll revisit that early next week. But it's all relevant right now because all that happened in the last 24 hours. And all Anthony Edwards did was prove exactly why the Wolves have still a real chance to finish at the top of the Western Conference, even without Karl-Anthony Towns on the floor for likely the balance of the regular season. So we'll get to all that here today. But trust me, we're going to talk a lot about Ant too. A big thank you here off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, CKEN. All right. Let's start. I don't know. Let's start with Cat real quick. So, well, I don't want to spend too much time on this. I don't know. We got to talk about Anthony Edwards. So, real quick, the way the Timberwolves handled Thursday is kind of how they're going to have to handle every game, which is a lot of slow-mo, and then hopefully a big scoring punch from Nas. There's going to be. I just a week ago was not even a week ago. It was like Monday. I think it was after the consecutive losses over the weekend. Last weekend, I was worried about the Wolves playing as much as they were playing without Ant or Cat on the floor. And I was criticizing the rotations because one of those guys had to be on the floor at all times. Like stagger your star players like the Clippers do with Kawhi and Paul George, et cetera, right? And I guess now James Harden as well. Now you only have Ant as your top flight scorer. Like, obviously, Rudy's still a superstar. But when you're talking about guys who are going to score, create their own offense or create their own offense, or that you're going to run plays for, right? Like Rudy's somebody you can run spread pick and roll to try and get him diving to the basket. And that's what the Wolves are going to do a ton of. But outside of that, it's Anthony Edwards. And Nas is the guy who's got to step up. And we saw that in this game, and we'll talk about it. I thought he played well. Especially early, the efficiency wasn't there, but that's okay. Like normally Nas's role in the past has been, hey, hopefully he comes in and he's efficient. Now it's just, hey man, you got to score some points. And if that's a higher volume, like seriously, after Ant, Nas is the guy. He's going to be your high volume guy outside of the construct of the offense, or also within it, hopefully. But he's the only other guy that's going to be able to say, all right, let's go score some baskets. I can shoot threes. I could take anybody off the dribble, any bigs off the dribble. I can score in transition. Nas is going to have to be that guy. And I'll bring this up again on Monday's show, but Zach Lowe at ESPN had a piece come out for ESPN Insider or ESPN Plus or whatever on Friday morning, like early. And he talks about the Wolves are going to be obviously challenged to win without Karl-Anthony Towns. He talks about how the Wolves offense likely will not get to a level where they'll win multiple playoff rounds. He basically says they could win in the first round, but they probably aren't going to win multiple rounds without Cat. And the reason he gives is because they don't have the hope of how the ceiling of what their offense would be with Karl-Anthony Towns, right? And I've talked about this before. The Wolves were always going to be a good playoff team this year because if the defense was going to stay at number one, because they have a number one defense, they're going to shut teams down in a slower, more half-court based playoff series. They just are. But the offense has been so middling that I've always said, with the pieces they have, the variance of their offense, we've seen these explosions. They can be awesome, they can be terrible, and they're usually one of the two offensively. They're very rarely somewhere in the middle. And now the awesomeness factor comes way down. It's much less likely that their offense can be insane, right? Because Karl-Anthony Towns isn't on the floor. And that's the point Zach's making here is I'll even just his exact quote. He says, the variance Towns brings, the possibility of a supernova offensive game, a guaranteed win, is gone. Right? Like with Cat, there's always the possibility you're going to drop 130 and win the game because you're also holding your opponent to 100 points or whatever. Now, the Wolves can still win. And like he also points out, the Wolves have been fantastic offensively with Gobert and Edwards on the floor and no Karl-Anthony Towns. I talked about spread pick and roll. They're going to do that. They're going to do a lot of pick and roll. They just have that lower ceiling. And Naz Reid is going to have to play something of that Karl-Anthony Towns role. Yes, off the bench. So when Kyle Anderson's on the floor, you're going to run a lot of pick and roll, but Kyle Anderson is not helping you spotting up from the corners, right? So they're going to have to be a little bit creative there with that lineup. You're going to see, I think, well, hopefully Monte Morris, sorry, he tweaked a hammy against the Pacers on Thursday, but you're going to see more 2 point guard lineups. They also just signed TJ Warren. We'll talk about that too. There's a lot that the Wolves are going to have to consider offensively in this game. All right. I want to get back to that Monday, but we can't go any further without talking about Anthony Edwards. And this is the start of the post-game pod portion of today's show. And let's start with the finish. I mean, I don't know what I can say to at this point, you have to have seen the replay of the Anthony Edwards block. And obviously the preceding possessions before that, he goes 1 of 2 at the line just prior, before the made free throws by the Pacers, the 3 made free throws after slow-mo fouls in the corner. Ant had the 3-pointer, and then he had the pull-up from, 16 feet straight on, right? 17 feet just beyond the free throw line. So he scored 6 points in the last 2+ minutes. And the block he was above the arc when Nesmith had the ball going to the basket inside the arc, and Ant catches up to him, jumps, blocks it up near the top of the square, hits his armpit on the foam of the backboard, or on the foam, on the bottom edge of the backboard, and hits his head on the underside of the rim. An incredible display of and the aggressiveness, competitiveness, will to win. Like, we throw that stuff around all the time, and it gets thrown around related to Ant, but this was all of the above epitomized in one play. Like, that is the definition. Like, here's a good way to look at it. Nobody would ever describe Jaden McDaniels as not having a competitive edge, right? And Jaden was right there in the play, but Ant comes flying out of nowhere to make this play. It's not only the want to, the willingness, and the competitiveness, but then on top of that, it's the athletic ability to jump as high as he did to block that shot. That is the sort of thing, because he not only wants to, but he can, and he's going to. And we still see that almost every night from Anthony Edwards. It's still not like 100% of the time, but in a close late game like this, he's going to give you that. And that is also variance that can propel you. Zach wrote this undoubtedly before this game, the piece that I just mentioned, referenced. But Anthony Edwards, like right now, the way he's performed this year, he should be an all-NBA player. He already is an all-star. He's not an MVP yet. He's not one of the top 10 players in the league. But this sort of performance, dragging a team to a win, dropping 44, scoring and defending in the final 2 minutes, if that starts to become more regular, then he's a top 10 player. And if it progressively becomes more regular and he starts to, remember, this was the time last year when he took that last mini leap. He was overcoming that ankle, I think it was, at this, maybe it was a knee this time of the year last year. He missed a game or two. And then he just kind of broke through, and everybody's like, okay, this guy could be an all-NBA guy like next year. If that same progression and trajectory happens now through April and hopefully into May, we're talking about a top 10 player. And then we can start to realistically have the conversation of like, is this an MVP candidate next year? What is, I think we know what his ceiling is. His ceiling is there isn't one. But then, like, the Michael Jordan conversations, I understand the comparisons. And I talked about it on the show a couple weeks ago. And it's obviously nuts, like, to actually compare him to Michael Jordan. But if he starts dragging a team missing its second best player, or arguably best, at least most efficient offensive player in Karl-Anthony Towns, if he drags this team into the playoffs far enough that Towns can come back, conference finals or whatever, then, like, I don't know, like, this is the sort of performance that makes people want to talk about the MJ comparisons, as unfair to both parties as that is. This is exactly the sort of thing, like, we can have that conversation if this becomes a regular occurrence. This is a like Mike performance. It just is. And the body of work otherwise, the consistency defensively, the efficiency even offensively, even though he shoots more threes, obviously, than MJ ever did, like, that's not there. He's not Michael Jordan. He's not 80. I know that we want to, KG's awesome. I'm glad he said he was 84 Jordan. I know he said he was 88 Jordan on Twitter last night. Fine. He's not yet, but he legitimately could be. And this is what makes people want to make that leap. And I know we've done this in the past with other players. But like, this block is a LeBron, like the LeBron chase down block on Iguodala, right? Like, this was actually a more incredible play. It just wasn't in the final. So I it's not given context, but the athletic feat of this play was more incredible. We can have that conversation if this becomes a regular occurrence. I don't know if that's the best way to put that. And this also gets overplayed. The phrase, he willed them to win. He did. He just did in this game. There's very few times where that's actually true, but we're going to go through studs and duds here in a minute. I mean, Ant was the best player on the floor, bar none. He was phenomenal late in this game, and he did will the Timberwolves to a win and really carry them to win physically himself. All right, lots more to get to on this game. Takeaway-wise, I want to do studs and duds, and like I said, we'll get back to some Cat stuff here early next week. We've got, unfortunately, it looks like a few weeks to talk about the impact of no Cat on the team. We'll also briefly talk Wolves Cavs for tonight, so all that's upcoming here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at eBay Motors. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd to bring you some of your best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for a daily draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. Let's check out who Josh has picked out for us on this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. Number 1, Kyle Anderson, none other than Slow-Mo himself on Josh Lloyd's list. With Karl-Anthony Towns out for at least the next 4-ish weeks, that's when he's going to be reevaluated. Slow-Mo is going to see a larger role and will likely start, and he did start on Thursday, but I would say he likely starts all the time for this Wolves team. Next week, though, the Wolves only play 2 games. So if you're picking them up for a season-long league, the Wolves only play 2 games next week. Slow-Mo can obviously contribute in multiple categories, which is what you want, I guess, depending on the type of league you're in. But keep Slow-Mo in mind for your fantasy league. Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy Basketball is going to help you win your fantasy championship. And eBay Motors knows that championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. It's the same with your vehicle. My first vehicle ever was a Mercury Tracer, a 95 Mercury Tracer. I loved it. I wish I had taken better care of it, but turns out high school and college, I wasn't as great with that. And also eBay Motors, I don't think existed at the time. Had it, I probably would have been, it wouldn't have been the same as having to go to a mechanic or whatever. It would have been much easier to take care of it myself and also just kind of make it look nicer. It was a 95 Mercury Tracer. So it wasn't like in the best shape, but I loved it, right? And eBay Motors would have gone a long way to helping me keep it in shape on the road. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof rack, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right. So other takeaways from Wolves Pacers. Let's start back at the beginning of the game. The Timberwolves did exactly what they needed to do. Remember, Anthony Edwards tweaked his ankle in the opening 30 seconds, left for a couple of minutes, came back, later fell hard on a pump fake, fouled a Pacers player, left the floor again, came back, still ended up playing 39 minutes in this game. But early, the offense wasn't just Ant. In fact, he wasn't even all that involved early. It was a lot of Rudy. The Wolves scored in the paint. It was Nas when he came into the game, played well. It was just good ball movement, really. And that's going to be huge. We could talk about Ant, and there's going to be games like this, but we've also seen Ant get tunnel vision and struggle in isolation. Not struggle to make shots consistently in isolation because it's hard to score in isolation. That's why there's so few guys that can legit do it. And Ant is one of them, but it's not going to happen every night. And early, the Wolves, I was encouraged that their offense was as good as it was, scoring 33 in the first quarter. Now, the Pacers are a horrific defensive team. But at the same time, Minnesota kept pace with the Pacers. And clearly, the game plan against the Pacers has to be just get back in transition. They play at such an incredibly high pace. There's so many talented offensive players. When the Wolves beat the Pacers in December or November, I guess it was, Haliburton didn't play. This was essentially a full-strength Pacers team plus Pascal Siakam. And, the Wolves did okay when it came to fast break points. They only lost that category 16-11, and everybody knows the 38-0 the Kings and Clippers games combined last weekend. The Wolves got killed in fast break points. They were better earlier this week. But only losing that category by 5, that's going to go a long way towards winning against a team like the Pacers. And the offense early was a big part of that. It was, I don't want to say methodical, but it was intentional is probably the best word to use. Minnesota was up 11 at halftime, and then it was really just the Pacers did speed things up in the third quarter. The Wolves the Wolves did not shoot the ball well from the perimeter. Uncharacteristic for Mike Conley and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Those guys combined to shoot 1 of 10 from 3. Alexander Walker's been struggling a bit outside the arc here lately. Plus, Monte Morris, after playing a really strong first half stint, hurt his hamstring, was out for the game. We don't know his status, of course, coming into Friday's game against the Cavs, but it's probably not great if he, the night before left with a hamstring. But with no Monte Morris, that meant Alexander Walker was back in his point guard role. McLaughlin was active after he wasn't available against Portland on Monday with an illness, but he was questionable coming in with an illness. He hadn't played in a week or whatever. So not sure. I would imagine McLaughlin's going to have to play Friday night if Morris isn't available. But this was this rotation, all of a sudden, it was 8 guys, and one of them just joined the team that day, or I guess the day before. But first game in uniform was TJ Warren, and he was all of a sudden a top 8 rotation guy in this game. And it's just amazing. We talk about the depth in the NBA, and the Wolves had and still have a deep roster. But man, it's amazing how quickly that can shift, right? And TJ Warren, we'll talk more about him on Monday, but he's going to be part of this rotation for this 10-day contract and undoubtedly a 10-day contract after that. And then we'll see. But he was a big part of it in this game. And Alexander Walker was pressed into point guard duty, and I thought was fine. Conley had to play 30 minutes, and this was another kind of ho-hum Mike Conley game, mostly because he missed a ton of threes, but he wasn't super involved otherwise. So it was all about Rudy and Ant. And Jaden McDaniels had a nice little kind of flurry. I believe it was fourth quarter. He had a couple of those short, kind of floating jumpers, when he floats to his left that he likes to shoot and makes with a relatively high frequency. Jaden was in a little bit of foul trouble in this game and only played 28 minutes, which didn't help. And it also contributed to TJ Warren playing 16 minutes and also Slow-Mo playing. Well, I guess he only played 28. It felt like he was on the floor more, but he also fouled out. I don't think Kyle Anderson played particularly well. We'll talk more about that in Studs and Does. But Jaden McDaniels was very good in this game, kind of low key good. He did a really good job when he was guarding Haliburton. Haliburton ended up with 23 and 13, but he also turned it over 5 times. It was 2 of 7 outside the arc. I think the length of McDaniels really bothered him. But offensively, Jaden had 11 on 7 shots and only attempted 1 3, but he made it and had 6 assists to no turnovers. Really, really good game for Jaden McDaniels. And he was a big part of the Wolves' offensive ball movement and knowing when to take the ball to the basket. It was actually just like it was strange. I know Ant was super high volume, but again, their best quarter was the first quarter, and he didn't do all that much in the first quarter, right? He had a dunk, and I think maybe made one other shot. He might have had 4 points in the first quarter of this game. maybe 5. And it was their best offensive quarter. They still managed to score 113 despite shooting 28% for 3 and only making 7 3-pointers. They only had 9 turnovers, and that's a big reason for it. And I've been saying it all season. If the Wolves don't turn the ball over, if they just shave 4 or 5 turnovers, which I know is a lot, but like they turned it over so much, if they could be around 10 turnovers a game instead of 14, I mean, this offense goes from like 16th in the league to like 12th immediately because they're that good offensively. They're that efficient. Rudy Gobert is a very efficient offensive player for all of his I shouldn't say for all of his warts because he's better than, I shouldn't say that phrase about him, but for some of his issues, his inconsistencies offensively, right? Can't create his own shot. You're not going to post him up with frequency. Occasionally struggles to catch the ball. He has massive gravity and he's efficient around the rim. He draws fouls. That's a huge thing. He's obviously a great screener. And then you have Anthony Edwards who can go off at any time. And then you've got these other guys who in this game, like shooting the ball, they struggled, but Jaden picked his spots. Naz was big early. TJ Warren hit a couple of big shots. If they can just play their roles, they have enough talented offensive players. They can survive without Karl-Anthony Towns, but they can't turn it over. Now, Cat's a high turnover player, relatively speaking. So, I mean, if Ant's going to play 39 minutes, get up 35 shots, and have 0 turnovers, which I believe I saw the stat. It might have been Alan Horton who had it on Twitter, or maybe it was Timberwolves PR. He's only the second Wolves player ever to have 40-plus points and no turnovers in a game, Kevin Garnett being the only other player. I mean, like this, they can hang around offensively. I mean, they kept pace, and the defense was obviously a big part of that with the second best offensive team in the league in the Pacers. So all that to say, I was impressed with the Timberwolves start to finish in this game. The third quarter being the main bump in the road, but the offensive execution was impressive. We talked about Ant's competitiveness and the way he closed the game earlier, but given all of the above, the Cat injury, the circumstances, the front end of the back-to-back, the first game of a long road trip, Monte Morris getting hurt, this was a very, very nice win for the Wolves. I want to talk studs and duds, briefly talk Wolves Cavs here at the end. It's all upcoming next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than a billion with a B, professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. They're constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making your process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, let's close with individual studs and duds here today. Obviously, Anthony Edwards, incredible. Yes, he shot the ball 35 times. He was better than 50% from the floor. He was 18 to 35. That's efficiency. 44 points on 35 shots. We'll take that. He was only 5 of 8 at the free throw line, including the one that would have put them up 3. Now, if they go up 3, the Pacers call a timeout and they run a play for a set 3-pointer, almost undoubtedly. But because of the missed free throw, Rick Carlisle said, hey, broken floor situation, let's go down and just tie it or get an open 3 in transition, which I agree with. If I'm the Pacers coach in that situation, you call a timeout on a make to set up a play to get yourself a clean 3-point look because you're just not going to get that off of a made free throw. But on the miss, I agree with him letting them roll. And Ant just made an incredible play. Just an incredible play. So anyway, Ant, 44 points on 18 of 35, 3 of 7 outside the arc, 5 of 8 at the line, 6 rebounds for Anthony Edwards, which was also big. 3 assists, 2 steals, 2 blocks, including the game saver, and 0 turnovers. Hard to imagine a better performance from Ant, especially given the context of the ankle tweak and the hard fall to the floor. He's going to be banged up on Friday night. I don't know what the encore is going to look like. I mean, he's going to be, I wouldn't be shocked if he has a less efficient performance on Friday. We've seen this before from Ant, and I'm not knocking him for that. I mean, he's As much as he's inhuman in a lot of ways, he's still a human. And it's going to be a challenge for him to bounce back on Friday and play extremely well, given how banged up he was in this game and how hard he had to play to drag the Timberwolves to a win. Rudy Gobert is another easy stud for this one. He played really well. I haven't really talked much about him yet because of the Ant heroics mostly. The Wolves won the points in the paint battle. The Pacers score a ton of paint points as a team. Now, a lot of that's because they score so much in transition. But I mean, like, Miles Turner's a good player. Like Pascal Siakam gets the basket a lot. Tyrese Halliburton, ton of assists. Like they get good looks. A lot of it is transition. But still, the Wolves won the points in the paint battle with no Karl-Anthony Towns by 6 points in this game. Rudy was a big reason for that. He actually did have 3 blocks. I only remembered a couple. He had 3 blocks in this game, but he was 18 and 14, 7 of 11 shooting, got to the line 5 times, 4 of 5 at the free throw line. We're seeing a Rudy Gobert free throw shooting resurgence. I feel confident in saying that. I'm going to quick pull up the game log and make sure I'm not crazy, but he's been making free throws. Yeah, he made all of his free throws each of the last couple games. What was he? 4 of 5 in this game, 7 of 7 in the last game, 2 of 2 in the game before that. So over the last 3 games, Rudy Gobert is 13 of 14 at the free throw line, which, I mean, come on. Like, I don't know. I guess he was shooting a bit below his career best free throw percentage here recently. I'm going to pull it up real quick. He's 65%. Last year, he was 64%. The year prior in Utah was 69%. So he's still shooting. He's right above his career average of 64, but he's 4 points below where he was 2 years ago in Utah when he got to the line even more often his final season with the Jazz. But anyway, 13 of his last 14 from the free throw line. So really good to see that from Rudy. He had 6 offensive rebounds in this game, was really big against the Pacers team that the Wolves needed to use that size to their advantage. And also getting back defensively, I should have touched on this earlier. That was huge. And I guess, overall, the Wolves, only losing the fast break category by 5 points to the Pacers in this game, which is so massive. Given the context of how good the Pacers are in the open floor and how bad the Wolves transition defense was over the last few games, overall this year, the transition defense has been light years ahead of where it was last year. So I want to be clear about that. But it has been so bad over the last week that I was not expecting this. And honestly, this is a 1-game sample. And I don't misconstrue this as me saying the Wolves are going to be better without Karl-Anthony Towns. I'm not saying that. Let me preface this. But the Wolves' transition defense will likely be better without Karl-Anthony Towns because Cat, along with Nas, have a propensity for falling down when they shoot the ball and just hanging out on the floor or complaining about a call, which has been maybe less bad this year for Cat than in past years. But everybody else gets back in transition pretty regularly. Nas is still the culprit, but Rudy's really good at sprinting back most of the time. He takes a possession off here and there, and it's usually pretty glaring when he does because there's no rim resistance. But like the rest of the time, he's, sprinting back, getting back defensively and protecting the rim. He did that in this game. There was like one possession I can think of where it was like, wait, where's Rudy? And he just wasn't back yet. One time, the whole game. If your 7-footer is going to play 40 minutes on the front end of a back-to-back and drop 18 and 14 with 3 blocks, okay, like you could take one possession off. He was incredible getting back in transition, and the Wolves as a team were good doing that in this game too. Jaden McDaniels is my final stud, 11 points, 8 rebounds, 6 assists, and no turnovers for Jaden. Was in a little bit of foul trouble, but was very, very good. 4 of 7 shooting, made his only 3-point attempt, made both of his free throws. Like I mentioned earlier, hit a couple of those tough kind of float to the left short jumpers that he likes to shoot. Very good defensively on Halliburton. The Wolves overall did very good on the role players for the Pacers. Halliburton had 23 and 13, but he had those 5 turnovers. Siakam had a good game, 24 points. He didn't really come alive till later in the game. Nesmith, though, just 8 points on 10 shots. Wolves did a very good job on him. Miles Turner, only 7 points, only played 21 minutes. They did a good job on the ancillary players for the Pacers, and Jaden McDaniels was a big part of that defensive effort. Duds for me in this game, I'm going to go Mike Conley. It's just kind of a nondescript Mike game, and we've seen that a little bit. He had I think the Clippers game, he had no points on Sunday. You're going to get that from time to time. The dude's still 36 or whatever, but that's fine. Whatever. He'll bounce back. Hopefully on the second night of a back-to-back and possibly without Monte Morris, but a little bit of a rough Mike game. It would have been nice to have him given the Morris injury. But he's a dud for me. And also Kyle Anderson, 3 points, 4 assists. I should say Conley was pretty good defensively in this game. I thought he was good defensively, so maybe that's a little bit unfair. Kyle Anderson, though, was a dud for sure. 3 points, 3 rebounds, 4 assists. He fouled out in 28 minutes, 1 of 5 shooting. He fouled the three-point shooter in the quarter that allowed the Pacers to draw within a single point there toward the end. Rough slow-mo game. You can't have too many of these with no Karl-Anthony Towns. He's got to play more like the slow-mo from last year, when, remember, he started at the 4 for the majority of last season because of the calf injury and found a rhythm at the 4. He's going to play more 4 now. He's going to start at the 4. He should be more comfortable in a slightly smaller lineup. So here's hoping that is the case here moving forward for the Wolves. I should also mention TJ Warren a little bit more. He played very well, just kind of plug and play. And we're going to talk more about him early next week as part of the Cat coverage plan, we'll call it. Kind of papering over as best the Wolves can over the next several weeks. Of course, the prognosis with Cat is they're going to reevaluate in about 4 weeks. He's going to have a surgical procedure. They're going to see how that works. And if he starts ramping up in 4 weeks, that's the last week of the regular season. So there's a shot then that he's playing maybe end of the first round, early second round. Best case scenario is what I would imagine based on, the information we have so far. The team hasn't said that yet, but based on all the reporting by national and local guys. So all that to say, we'll talk more about TJ Warren, but he was valuable in this game. 7 points, was a +1 in 16 minutes, 3 of 5 shooting, and played well. Plug and play forward, can play both spots. That's big. All right. Wolves have the Cavs on Friday night. It's an ESPN game, 6:30 p.m. Central is the scheduled time, which means tip will be, 11, 12 minutes after that. The Wolves are actually favored in this game at FanDuel by 1.5. Monte Morris, I think we got to consider is questionable. Cat is out. Second night of a back-to-back. Cleveland is coming off that big win over the Celtics earlier this week. But then they followed that with a loss to the Hawks. Was that last night? Are they in a back-to-back too? No, it was 2 nights ago. They lost to the Hawks on the second night of a back-to-back on Wednesday. So they had that big emotional win over the Celtics on, I think it was Tuesday, and then lost to the Hawks by 11 on Wednesday on the road. 1-game road trip. Now they're back home Friday night. They'll have the rest advantage. They have the travel advantage. They have, I guess Mobley's out, so it's not like they have a major health advantage. To me, this is a pick-em. Like, FanDuel's got the Wolves favored by 1.5. Feels like a pick-em to me. This is going to be a really good game. Hopefully, Ant is able to do something like what he did Thursday, and hopefully some of the other, Rudy does Rudy things, and Conley comes to the party. McDaniels plays how he did Thursday. Nas needs to have a really big game against the Cavs. It's a fun matchup, certainly, and it's the first time we've seen Cleveland this year, and the Cavs, Clippers, and Celtics have been the best 3 teams since Christmas. It's a tough matchup. It really is, even with no Mobley. So looking forward to it. We'll, of course, have the live postcast on Locked On Sports Minnesota. We'll have that here on the audio feed over the weekend. My next show is going to be Monday, and we'll talk weekend from the Wolves. Of course, the Wolves have, let's see, next week, I mentioned this earlier, they only have 2 games next week. So they have the Cavs Friday night, 6:30 on ESPN. And they don't play again until Sunday night, which is also an ESPN game at the Lakers, Sunday night at 8:30. So Monday's show will be the post-game pod from the Lakers game on Sunday. So anything big happens in the Cavs game, we'll talk about it then. But again, live postcast on Locked On Sports Minnesota. We'll have the audio here on Locked On Wolves audio feed. But my next show will be Monday, the post-game pod from Wolves Lakers. All right. That's all we have for you today here on the show. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.